So welcome. My name is Pam McNerney and I'm your event host for the evening. So after the event, there will be books for sale both here at this register and the register on the other side of the wall. And then Adrienne will be signing books for us. And we do ask that you purchase the books first before you have them signed to avoid any confusion. So I am pleased to introduce Adrienne Brodeur. She's the author of the memoir Wild Game, which I know some of you have read because you were talking about it enthusiastically. That was selected as a best book of the year by NPR and the Washington Post, and it's in development as a Netflix film. She founded the literary magazine Zoetrope, All Story, and she currently serves as executive director of Aspen Words, a literary nonprofit and program of the Aspen Institute. She splits her time between Cambridge and Cape Cod, where she lives with her husband and children. And Alisyn Camerota is a journalist, author, and anchor of CNN Tonight weekdays, which is 10 p.m. to midnight. Tonight. Oh, her debut novel, Amanda Wakes Up, which I can't wait to read, by the way, was selected as a National Public Radio as one of the best books of the year and by Oprah Magazine as a must read. And she's currently working on her memoir. So help us welcome Alisyn and Adrienne.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We love this bookstore. This was the first place that I did my first reading for Amanda Wakes Up, and it's so great to be back, and it's so cozy and just a wonderful vibe. And I couldn't be more excited to interview my dear friend, Adrienne Brodeur. So Adrienne and I go way back, and we'll talk a little bit about that during this process because I pride myself on being a little bit involved in her writing process, and she's very involved in my writing process. So we can tell you about our pajama club writing club. So anyway, Rennie, great to see you. How's the book tour going?
So far, so good. I mean, it's been very busy. The book's been out about 10 days and I haven't stopped, but it's fun. This
Is
is
it different than Wild Game?
yes, because I'm far less terrified. You know, it's writing a novel is a really different experience than writing a memoir, but even the bigger difference is publishing and talking about a novel is a lot easier. So the anxiety I felt about having my whole life judged as opposed to just my literary life judged, it's been a lot more fun. I'm enjoying this one more.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm really glad to hear that because I know that, I mean, Wild Game went incredibly well and it was received beautifully, but I remember that you were nervous because for months before it was so personal about your life. But I mean, in some ways, isn't every book like this book, for instance? So it's the story of Cain and Abel, but your characters are Ken and Abby. And so they're brother and sister, and it's the subject matter of sibling rivalry. So tell us about why you chose that subject.
Okay. You know, when I finished up on my book tour for Wild Game, which was during the pandemic in March 2020, I got sent home like everyone else. And you know, it was quiet, right? And so I had time to think again. And I don't know how books come to everyone, but I feel like it's almost like there's a little woodpecker in your brain that's just kind of like a nagging thought, and you sort of watch where your subconscious goes. And I kept thinking, there were a few things I kept thinking about. I thought a lot about the year that this book is set, which is 2016, and it's set before the election. But I remember even in real time thinking this would be a time worth exploring in fiction, because it was such the novel does not confront the election directly at all, but there's that mood, that anxious time that 2016 was. So I knew I wanted to set it at that time, but where my mind kept going were to siblings and that relationship and why it can be so fraught. And I have one brother, I have myriad step siblings. Both my parents had half siblings they didn't know about. You and I have talked about your half sibling and the interesting relationships there. So I was really curious about the relationship. Of course, when I thought, you really should read Cain and Abel and think about the original sibling story. Well, for those of you who haven't read it recently, it's like 2 sentences. There is nothing helpful in that story. I was like, okay, it's going to explain something, but no, there's no motivation. You're just like one brother. Okay, God favored this. Yeah. So, but what I did get from that story, I realized was sort of the structure for the book, because in Cain and Abel, gifts are given to the father, and there's a perception of favoritism, and stuff happens. So in my novel, the whole sort of forward movement of the novel, the propulsion, is all going towards the patriarch's 70th birthday. And I think with gifts, it often reveals a lot more about the giver than the receiver. So that was a long-winded explanation.
That was fascinating. And so another one of your topics, and just a rich topic for all of us, is family secrets.
Yeah.
And this book is no different. And then I feel that you always marry that with Cape Cod, which is like the land of buried secrets and buried treasure. So tell us about that and how, I guess you weren't done exploring family secrets even after Wild Game.
Yeah. I was done exploring my own secrets, which was nice. And it was actually really liberating and fun to sort of take a kaleidoscopic look at a family. So the book goes from perspective, alternating perspectives of these family members. And really what I was hoping to do was kind of, explore deeply the inner workings of a family. And I think, we all, I mean, life is hard. We have really complex worlds. And I think we all have this idea that we know more about what is going on in the minds of the people around us than we do. So it was actually a lot of fun to explore those perspectives, and the whole time the reader knows a lot more than each of the characters going through it. But secrets are they're really a great device, if nothing else, for storytelling, because you're kind of constantly, when is this going to come out? How is this going to come out? What's going to happen now? And that was a little bit the case for me as the writer too. I mean, you only know so much as you start a book, and you have ideas. I'm not someone who outlines an entire plot by any means. So I knew that I was driving towards this event, this 70th birthday party of the patriarch, but I didn't know exactly how things were going to unfold. And it's, I remember when I was an editor and writers would talk about like the characters talking to them and all this, and thinking that's just a little woo-woo. But in fact, you have to write into this to understand who these people are. And so, I feel like characters are sort of like icebergs. You have to know so much just to show that little tiny tip that's out of the water, because it takes a lot of writing to understand what the offhand comment might be that one character makes to another, and it takes a lot. Did I answer that question? Yeah, a little bit. Okay.
I mean, about family secrets,
Yeah,
basically,
okay.
and that you
And then the Cape. Yeah,
yes. I mean, you write about the Cape so beautifully, as I'm sure you all know. It's so that your writing about the Cape is so evocative. It's so, you can see the dunes the way you describe them. You can smell the salt air the way you describe it. Do you ever want to write a book that's not about the Cape? Or do you find that is just the perfect place for buried treasure and buried secrets?
It's definitely the perfect place for buried treasure and secrets, for sure. And I find it an endlessly fascinating landscape, in part because, it's a place of, well, there are people who live there year round. There are summer people. So it's got issues of privilege and class. But the thing that I am most drawn to always is just the natural beauty. And I think there's something about the fragility of the landscape. I mean, it is a giant sandbar, and it changes hour by hour with tide and wind and light. And yeah, there's something just so beautiful, but no, I think I gotta leave it someday in my, my fictional life, I don't know, but maybe.
Don't tamper with perfection. Yeah. Okay, so you touched on this, but let's talk about your writing process, because I'm really interested in that. So when you start, I know a little bit about how you start a book because it's in your pajamas and it's next to me in a cozy inn at Beaver Kill, New York.
It's one day a year.
One weekend a year, we go on this wonderful retreat, and it's not a writer's retreat. We go with a bunch of friends that we met when our kids were in kindergarten. So we have daughters the same age. And when they were in kindergarten, we all became this sort of group of fast friends. And so we still vacation together. 18 years later, our girls just graduated from high school. And one weekend a year, and Rennie and I steal away and for many hours, like climb into one of each other's beds and read each other's writing, because we've been, we will have been working on things throughout the year. So I know a little bit about your process and that you write these beautiful scenes, but do you have no idea what the end of the book is when you start? Like what is your process beyond that?
For this book, I didn't. So I'll back up and say, I write very early in the morning. As you heard, I have a job, you have a job. We have children and families and husbands. And so you have to shoehorn in the time where you can. And in my personal case, the only hours where I know no one will bother me, and my personal to-do list, which screams in my head most of the day, is utterly quiet, is very early in the morning. So I get up then, and that is my basic process. But no, it was so different writing a novel than a memoir.
Why?
And
tell us why.
Yeah.
Why was it?
I will, and then you'll have to answer the same question. But it's with the memoir, first of all, whose perspective you're telling it from, your own. All the characters, and you essentially know the plot. So there is a lot of craft and work that goes into memoir. It is not easy, but you are you're sort of sculpting from the block of your life. Like you're not going to get shocked by your memoir. You're not going to be surprised. Oh yeah, then the bus hit me. That just doesn't happen in memoir. So with the novel, I will say it's just harder, I think. It's every page, anything can happen to any one of these characters, absolutely anything. And the world is so wide open that I think that's when, like, figuring out a structure or making any decisions really helps the rest of the book. And I think having that structure, once I knew I was going towards that party, I was really off to the races with that and very excited. And I wanted to make sure that there was something tremendous at stake for each character. So just to give you a little sort of overview of the book, it's set in 2016, it's set on Cape Cod, and it tracks this very small family of a father and his 2 adult children. And at the onset of the book, you realize, well, it starts with, as I said, each of them having something big at stake. So for Adam Gardner, the patriarch, he is about to turn 70, and he is really anxious about losing relevance. He's a famous marine biologist. He thinks he's on the brink of making an extraordinary discovery that's kind of going to seal his reputation and legacy. So that's where he is. He has an adult son, Ken, who's 41, who's just sealed a real estate deal that's kind of catapulted him into a new stratosphere of wealth. And his real ambitions are political. So this is going to enable him to run for Congress. And then Abby, the daughter, is 38, and she has finally found her voice as an artist. Oops. Okay. Found her voice as an artist. And so this is how things are set up. Everything looks like it's going grand for this family, but of course, nothing is as it seems. And for whatever reasons, they're all withholding their big information from each other until the party. And you realize that they're all keeping secrets. And Adam's secret, or what he's not telling people, is that he's stopped taking his bipolar medication because he thinks that if his mind is freed from the anesthetizing effects of the drugs, he's going to be able to connect the dots of this theory. And Ken's wife, Jenny, has discovered some really unsavory things going on that Ken's been doing online, and she's given him the ultimatum of therapy or divorce. And Abby has started painting these very, very revealing narratives about her relationship with her brother. So, you know, this is all moving, and the reader's sort of always one step ahead of the characters, and it's all moving sort of explosively or towards this party. But no, I had no idea. And then it was like, well, you know, it's not going to be Cain and Abel. There's no people are murdered in this book, but I had to figure out what kind of ending would work for that. So that was actually sort of the most challenging part.
Isn't that scary when you don't know what you're going to do for the big
Yes,
explosion?
yes, it's terrifying. It is very scary.
Okay, so I feel like, yeah, I feel like now would be a good time for you to read a portion of it.
Oh, so I think so. This right here. Well, you know, I can put it. You're not going to read very much. So I'm going to read from the beginning, but not the very beginning of the book. And I'm going to read from the Adam character, who bizarrely, given that he's sort of a cranky old codger, and entering an episode of mania as we start, he was the easiest person for me to write. I swear to God, I put my hands out and I just channeled him. So I had a good time with him. To his credit, at the onset of this latest bout of insomnia, Adam followed protocol and made an appointment at the clinic in Hyannis, knowing full well what to expect: a blood draw, a barrage of questions, an adjustment of medication. What he hadn't expected was that the doctor who'd been treating him for the last 3 decades had retired. Why Dr. Peabody hadn't bothered to inform him directly was beyond him. 30 years was, well, a very long time. Adam pointed out the oversight to the front desk clerk, a busty young woman with blue fingernails, who assured him that an email had been sent to all patients the previous month. Had he thought to check his junk folder, she asked, clicking together her talons. Adam started to answer, but held his tongue. Who but an idiot would bother to check something called a junk folder? He followed her down the hall to the exam room, still puzzling over why his longtime doctor, at least 5 years his junior, would have retired. To do what? In Peabody's place, a kid half Adam's age, outfitted in tight pants and alarmingly bright orange socks, strode into the exam room. Was it too much to ask that the person evaluating his mental state have at least one gray hair on his head? The new doctor acknowledged Adam only cursorily, opting to study his electronic patient chart first. Mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was the doctor's lecture on sleep hygiene. For the love of God, why not just call a thing? Passed away, big bone. What was so wrong with dead and fat? Euphemisms were tools of the feeble-minded. Hygiene brought to mind feminine products, something Adam did not wish to contemplate. But that led him to think about parts of the female anatomy he did like to contemplate. Stay focused, Adam reminded himself. He took notice of the boy's weak chin. I don't think we've had the pleasure of a proper introduction, Adam said, cutting the lecture short. I'm Dr. Gardner. In his lifetime, Adam Gardner, PhD, had an acclaimed career as a research scientist for the Cape Cod Institute of Oceanography, CCIO to those in the know. His glory days were in the late 1970s when, as a young scientist, he was part of a team that disproved once and for all the notion that life could be sustained only by a photosynthesis-based food chain. In the pitch black depths of the Pacific Ocean north of the Galapagos Islands, they'd encountered evidence in the form of foot-long clams, giant red tube worms, and spiny white crabs that even in darkness there was life. Adam and his team discovered and named more than 24 species. In the decades since those early successes, he'd become one of the foremost experts on cetacean biology, studying the population dynamics and communications of humpback whales. Beyond these professional accomplishments, he was a Vietnam veteran who had single-handedly raised his 2 children after his beloved first wife, Emily, died suddenly at the age of 30. In short, he wasn't about to let some kid outrank him.
So good. So that reminds me, did you have to become an expert in marine biology? Because it seems like you are.
My kids always joke with me or ask me, you know, Mom, if you weren't a writer, if you didn't do this literary thing, what would you do? And I would totally be a marine biologist. I would love to. So that was also one of the thrilling things about fiction. You can research and study what you want to. In fact, when I was taking my daughter around on college tours, we went to Bowdoin at one point in time, and they have this marine center. I was like, this is it. But I know a lot about humpbacks already. I read all about them. I'm obsessed with whales. It was actually an effort what not to include. Like, what wonderful tidbit was I gonna include at the cost of all others? Pink milk. How cool is it? They have pink milk because they eat so much krill. I thought that was amazing.
And so did you do research? I mean, is all that in your head, or how much research did you do for this book? And also about bipolar disorder?
I did quite a bit of research on both. I've read a lot of books. There's a great whale book, if any of you are obsessed, called Fathoms, which was one of the most beautiful books I've read. You know, it had if anyone knows about whale falls, which are just like environmental poetry or something. And I also read a lot of case studies involving bipolar. I have mental illness in my family, as I'm sure we all do. And I had a very significant moment in my younger life when the younger sister of a dear friend of mine, at a moment that I just had not much going on, so I could take her in, showed up on my doorstep. I'd never met her before, and she was in full-blown mania at the time. And I was sort of talking to her brother as all this was unfolding. And when I described what she was talking about to me, she was utterly unrecognizable to him, because he described her as this sort of sweet, simple nursery school teacher, and she was connecting like quantum physics and pages of Shakespeare, and she just said it was, you know, she was in that very heady, grandiose, she knew everything, every like facet of her brain was accessible to her. And when she actually did come down, and she was a rapid cycler, not like Adam, I mean, she just missed so intensely this moment of having access to all of that. So that's stuck in my brain for years now, of just, and that was sort of the Adam's motivation for a kind of self-medicating and trying to stay up for a while in order that, you know, he could connect the dots of this theory of his. But I mean, I found the research really fun.
I mean, I can see why that's so compelling, and why you would want to explore that more. What's your least favorite part of the writing process?
Okay, this is going to sound like a non-answer, because I feel like obviously writing is really hard. It is something that, you know, all writers, we're all kind of like, oh, it's so hard. The truth is, I don't know if it's that I've had to shift my paradigm on the whole thing, but I find it such a privilege to be able to do this. I find it so satisfying writing. It's literally the only thing I do entirely for myself. You know, the job is for income. I spend a lot of time rolling socks like the rest of us, you know, doing laundry, what have you. And this, you know, I don't really meditate. I don't really do a lot of exercise, but this is my thing. And it's not that nothing's hard about it. There's a lot that's hard about it. You know, but mostly I really love it.
That's so great. I mean, that's so great to hear, because you do hear about how challenging it is for writers and the writer's block and how hard it is. And I think that, I mean, you would know better than I, because you deal with writers all the time, but people who have rolling deadlines and who are on a contract and have to keep churning out books, I think it does become a grind. like so much does. But, you know, I mean, are you able to kind of do it in, on your own terms?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not someone who's got a rolling contract or is grinding anything out. I mean, until I have a book, you know, it's I think there's certain people who are writing a book a year or a book every other year or something like that. And I don't think I would want to do it that way. It's, you know, yeah, I mean, when I've got sort of a good chunk of something written that is ready for the world, I will then show it to my editor and we'll sort of figure out that piece. In fact, there's a funny story attached to that, because when I was writing Little Monsters, you know, you do get quite superstitious as a writer, like, is it time? Should I show? Do I not show? You know, this. And I'm not a religious person, but I remember really trying to figure out whether I should show Lauren my pages. And this was Lauren is the same editor who also was the editor on Wild Game. And I was like, what should I do? What should I do? And I was like, sort of had one of those, I didn't say it out loud, but give me a sign moments. And that was when, I don't know if you guys saw this, that lobster man in Provincetown got swallowed by a humpback. And I was like, yep, I'm sending this in. It was that day. Literally, I was like, okay, that's a good sign.
Actually, that's my friend, Michael Packard. That's my old teenage friend, Michael Packard, who got swallowed by a whale. I'm not kidding you. I used to vacation in Provincetown as an adolescent and a teenager, and Michael Packard was one of the kids that I ran around with. We were like a posse of 5 kids. He got swallowed. Because he survived. He survived. He got spit out like the blowhole or something.
Okay, my research says that's not possible. But yes, they have very small throats, so he actually physically couldn't have been swallowed. He was in the mouth, and then the whale was like.
Thank you. Yeah, just being like propelled out of the blowhole. That's what I'd like to. That's how I envision it.
Like in your book.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Packard, who I talked to after this, he the mouth of the whale clamped down to the point where it was dark, completely dark in there, and he was like, holy shit. I was just swallowed by a whale. Like it was pitch black.
Now, did you get an exclusive on this for Santa?
I tried to. Believe me, there was a whole chain. It involved Norman Mailer's son. That there was a whole chain, and Mike was just like, nah, screw it. I have to go back fishing tomorrow. Like literally, he's that kind of fisherman.
Yeah.
Didn't want to come on CNN, had to go back fishing after he was swallowed by a whale. So anyway, thank you for bringing that up.
1 or 2 questions.
Yes, let's do that. So everybody start thinking of your questions for Adrienne, of which there are many. Okay, what are you reading right now? Or do you read while you write?
I do read while I write. I read all the time. The book that I've read recently that I loved, and not just because we have a similar title, it's called Monsters by Claire Dieter. It's nonfiction, and it's so fascinating. It is a collection, well, it's essays, but it sort of has a full narrative basically on how do we feel about artistic monsters, you know, the Woody Allens, the Picassos, these wonderful artists who have done terrible things. And she's just brilliant. It was such an interesting musing because her person, who was it that she can't give up?
Michael Jackson.
No. We could go on with this left. The name is going to come to me in a second, but I thought that was beautiful. I just finished Covenant of Water, which, you know, so good, but that baby is long. So make sure you've got a nice vacation or something ahead. I listen to it because that's something I can do while walking and that type of thing. But yeah, there's always a lot of great stuff.
And what were you reading when you wrote this?
I mean, over the last 2 years, probably 100 different books.
Yeah. That tells me you're a great writer, because sometimes if I'm reading while writing, it invades, you know, like I find myself like picking up some of the ticks of whatever I'm reading, but that tells me you're a professional. Okay, so any questions for Adrienne?
I just wondered how you got the title of the book.
You know, so the title, on the surface, it's what the patriarch used to call his children when they were young. But of course, titles are kind of like books themselves. They have different meanings for different people. And I feel like, there are a lot of monsters in the book, from just, the things in the deep ocean, but also the microaggressions that I explore against women, all that type of thing. But yeah, it was one of these times where, like with Wild Game, that title just was so obvious to me because it was sort of this book that my mother was writing, a cookbook, and she was testing recipes for wild game, and it worked on every level. I didn't really, this was a working title I had for this book, and there was a year of just like, should I do this, and coming up with 100 other ones, and then just being like, yeah, no, it's going to be this. So.
Yes. My question addresses wild game, is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
So my question is not out of monetary curiosity. It's more because I feel like it's so important to you. But what happened to the next?
So, for those of you who haven't read this book, my mother had a necklace, and my mother was a very smart woman, but she had this fixation on this necklace that took on this sort of mythical status for her. And she imagined that it was so valuable, like of incalculable value. You would have thought the necklace was the Hope diamond. Right. And she was obsessed with it. And she kept trying to give it to me, and she was unable to. So she'd be like, hey, you can sell this. I mean, the fact is, I'm about to send my daughter off to college, and the necklace is not going to help with that. So, yeah, it's certainly more valuable than most of the jewelry I wear, but it's not, it's nothing crazy at all.
But you have the necklace.
I do have the necklace. I do have.
Important to you, isn't it, having it or not?
There's a lot of bad juju with that necklace for me. So I have never worn it. I don't imagine I ever will. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's this really, my mother was very glamorous and kind of, her name, Malabar. She was Malabar. I don't think I could quite pull it off, but I sort of think that maybe my mom died last summer, and I was thinking maybe after she died, and I haven't really thought about it since then, that I would, have the stones made into, rings or something for my daughters and nieces and friends who've helped me with the book, that kind of thing. But I haven't
like
done
that
it.
idea.
You do? Which one do you want, Alisyn?
That's a great idea. On every level. On every.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Well, it's so much fun to see you both up there, both Alisyn and Adrienne are good friends of mine. And I had the privilege of being Alisyn's editor when I was an editor at Viking. So what I thought when I thought about you two in conversation was the interesting circumstance, sort of a joint question, that you both have combined the personal and the political in fiction with wit, with a light touch, with a kind of a similar time period, although at different points on the timeline when you were writing it, that 2016 and pre-2016 period, such a fraught time. And I was wondering how you did what you did in terms of capturing the tone and figuring out how to foreground and background things. And Adrienne, I do think that one of the most brilliant aspects of Little Monsters is how the greater world is always there. It's ever present, but you don't really put it on the page. And I don't quite know how you did that sleight of hand. But to hear both of you just reflect a little bit on that, I think would be a lot of fun.
It's such a great question. It's such a great question.
For Carol to ask about that.
Yeah, and Carol is an old and dear friend. So for me, I don't know about the rest of you, but I just kept thinking about that time period. And even when I was in it, I remember, we were all aware that things were changing. Clearly, we all thought they were going to go in one way, or most of us thought they were going to go in one way, and they went in a very different way. But for me, I found this sort of confusion of of men, particularly older men, like, what? So I can't, it's not okay to notice that a lady's pretty anymore, and like this stuff, and then there's Ken, who clearly is, he wants to run for office, he's, and he's right leaning, but I mean, he's obsessed with erosion because his property is just disappearing on him. He's got all this waterfront property. So I love the tension of all of it. And the fun part of it for me was that the reader knows so much more than the characters, because this book stops before the election and they're all going in the direction of what they thought would happen, but that didn't happen.
Right.
But no, you.
Well, I think what's interesting about your book is that it's sort of ominous because we do all know what happens, so it kind of hovers. And your book there's Abby, the daughter, has this an optimistic idea that things are about to change and Hillary Clinton's about to be elected and we're about to have this kind of, sea change in society and everything. But as the reader, you know that there's this kind of like dark cloud hovering over what's really going to happen. When I wrote mine, which came out in 2016, I had started writing. So I worked at Fox I work at CNN now. I worked at Fox for a long time. So I was often interviewing a lot of these characters. And one of them was Donald Trump. And at that time, he was kind of clownish. And he was, before we knew that he had a tyrannical side, he was sort of a big, colorful real estate bon vivant. And so I was able to make him kind of a caricature in my book, and it helped. I was interviewing all of these Karl Roves and Herman Cain at the time, who was running for president, and all of these different characters, that it helped me in my process to be able to satirize it. And that was liberating in fiction to be able to do that. And then we were like walloped by the reality. So you had the hindsight and I had the foresight to know that something was happening, something was afoot. But I thought if we could just all keep some levity, it might get us through it, but that was wrong also.
I was just going to say, I think there was, in both of our cases, there was something about, or I'll just speak for mine, but there was something about examining this looming family implosion in a greater cultural implosion that was really interesting.
Yes, and I'm so glad for you that the Washington Post review picked up on that and like immediately recognized that you were doing this implosion within an implosion and the tension in both places. And that's great because that is what you were doing. But not every, at first blush, people could just read it for the plot, but I'm glad that people realized. Okay, next question. Yes. What did you learn to write?
Oh, that's tiny. I think I learned to write as a reader and an editor. I have not taken I don't have an MFA. I've taken a writing workshop or two in my life, but mostly, writing fiction is a lot about compression, and you're distilling these moments, these big moments that you're trying to express with gestures or sentences. So it helps to think about it a little bit that way. And but in the end, you write by writing, you practice and practice, and nothing starts. I know everyone says this, but nothing starts great at all. And I'd say where the beauty is, it's just all in the revision and making the lines sing later, but sort of laying out your groundwork, your structure, sort of getting it out on the page. And I don't have a good answer.
I have an answer that's important here. She's lying. Because when I hear her first draft at that Beaver Kill weekend, when I'm in my pajamas and I come downstairs and she's already been working at the fireplace, and I come downstairs and she goes, "Oh, can I just read you a few pages?" And I say, "Yes," and they're beautiful. She reads me beautiful. I remember the very first ones that you read me from this book about the whale sounds and about how Adam was interpreting the whale sounds and the spirals of them and how they were like the spirals of the shells. I just remember being blown away because it was so beautiful. So you have a way with description that is just your natural way. And then of course you revise the story and revise it, but you do have a real talent and way with words like that. Thank you.
Can you talk about the trajectory from
having a book published to Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, what I will say about development is it is a long process, and Netflix has picked it up, yet we are not in a dark theater watching this movie yet. So, I can expound on it, but the fact is, so many books come close and don't get made. And do I think it might get made? I do. I mean, it was optioned very early on. I think in 2018, I went through a whole iteration with one production company and one really wonderful writer director who I adored, who came and worked with me. She was brilliant. We had sort of this collaborative thing. And then another project, are you there, God, it's me, Margaret, got greenlit. And so, she left. And that was, I still love her. I talked to her, but I was so sad about that. So then, you go back to stage one. It went from, I forget where the first one was, but then on to Netflix. Everything seems absolutely golden. They get Nick Hornby to write it, But by the way, they haven't sent me the script, so I still don't know. I mean, it is just the most bizarre process, and it sounds glamorous and sexy. It does not feel that way.
Let's do 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Yes.
About the bipolar subject.
Mhm.
I've just started it, but I haven't gotten far. But that interests me because I was curious whether your research was mostly like data research, clinical types of stuff, or interviewing actual people who you're living with, mental illness or habits around them, that the insights, where that comes from, how you develop that character.
Both, and a lot of both.
Could you sort of repeat or
Oh, I'm sorry.
condense
So-
and say what the question is?
She was asking what kind of research I did on the mental health of Adam. Was it sort of data-driven research versus interviewing people? And I did a bit of both. I've also, there are several people close to me in my life who have bipolar disorder. And I read a lot of, the standard great books. I mean, the K. Jameson, and a friend of mine, I talked to several friends who are therapists who work with people. So I did a lot of different types of research. I don't know if that's, a deeply satisfying answer, but I can't sort of tell you, it all sort of melds together, and then the character also just becomes the character and is unique. And as you know, if you've been around people, I mean, that expresses itself so differently in different individuals. And there's some very high functioning and sort of slow cyclers. There are some people who are just, doing that. And obviously I was guessing a little bit on, his own popping of different pills to go up and down and so on. I had to imagine the effects of those on someone, and I couldn't research, all of that. But there's enough out there. Yeah. One last question.
Okay, I'll ask the last one. The most annoying question that any author, I'm doing it, that is ever asked. The second you publish your book, what are you working on now?
This is like, when you have a baby and someone's like, are you gonna have another? And you're like, oh God, I've just been broken in two. Are you serious? So that little sort of woodpecker nagging feeling that I described when I have that a little bit about another idea that I so wouldn't even begin to be able to articulate, but maybe at Beaver Kill next, January.
Yes, but I knew that you might because I remember after Wild Game that you had that nagging. I remember that you had a little nagging woodpecker thing, so I figured that you did. So that's great. I'm glad that something's percolating in there. That's great. Ready, thank you. Really fascinating.